The Glock 19's barrel looked bigger than Cassandra Sterling's entire future. She was on her knees behind a marble counter, hands trembling, designer suit torn at the shoulder, while plaster dust from the ceiling rained down like ash. 3 men, 3 guns, 1 way out, and the only man standing between her and a bullet was the same man she'd spent the last 30 minutes verbally destroying. The janitor. The nobody from Oakland with calloused hands and worn work boots. 30 minutes ago she'd told him he was beneath her, that his poverty was a personal failure, that his life meant nothing compared to hers. She'd looked at Daniel Cross and seen everything she'd clawed her way out of, everything she'd sworn never to be again, and she'd tried to obliterate him with words. Now he was the only thing keeping her alive. How does a $12 billion CEO end up depending on a maintenance worker to save her life? Why are we cruelest to the people who see us most clearly? And can you earn redemption after you've destroyed someone's dignity? One carefully chosen insult at a time. This is the story of the worst blind date that ever happened, and the only one that truly mattered. If you're ready to see how arrogance met survival, how a single afternoon shattered and rebuilt 2 broken people, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The late October afternoon painted San Francisco in shades of amber and shadow, the kind of light that made everything look more expensive than it already was. Café Lumière sat tucked between Union Square boutiques, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stage for the city's elite to perform their carefully curated lives. Inside, beneath pendant lights that cost more than most people's monthly rent, Cassandra Sterling checked her Patek Philippe for the 3rd time in as many minutes. 4:27, 3 minutes late. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her charcoal Tom Ford suit, the fabric so fine it might as well have been woven from her own ambition. At 37, Cass had built Sterling Capital Management into a $12 billion empire through a combination of ruthless intelligence and an almost supernatural ability to identify weakness in both markets and people. Her dark hair was pulled into a flawless low bun, her makeup applied with surgical precision. Her entire presentation was a declaration of control. The blind date had been Isabel's idea. Isabel. Chen, her college roommate from Berkeley, and the only person still brave enough to suggest that Cass's personal life resembled a wasteland. "He's different from your usual type," Isabel had said over lunch 2 weeks ago, which should have been Cass's first warning. Cass's usual type was venture capitalists, tech CEOs, men who understood that relationships were strategic partnerships with measurable returns on investment. Different how? Cass had asked, already composing her refusal. "He's real," Isabel had said simply. "Just give him 2 hours, that's all I'm asking." Which was how Cass found herself occupying a corner table at Lumière, watching pedestrians rush past on the street below, already calculating how quickly she could extract herself from whatever catastrophe Isabel had arranged. She'd dressed for intimidation. The suit, the Hermes Birkin bag that cost $45,000, the watch that represented what some families spent on a car. If this man was different, she'd make sure he understood exactly what league he wasn't playing in. At 4:30 precisely, the cafe door opened. Cass's first impression was confirmation of her worst suspicions. The man who entered wasn't wearing a suit. He wore dark jeans, clean but worn, and a simple gray Henley shirt that had seen better days. Work boots. Not Italian leather, no watch she could see, no designer anything, no signal that he understood the arena he'd just entered. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with dark hair slightly too long to be professionally cut, and a build that suggested physical work rather than gym memberships. As he scanned the cafe, his eyes gray, she noted held something she couldn't quite name. Weariness, maybe. Or assessment. When his gaze found her, she saw the moment of recognition. Isabel must have shown him a photo. He walked toward her table with a quiet confidence that irritated her immediately. Confidence required credentials, and nothing about his appearance suggested he'd earned any. Cassandra. His voice was low, careful. I'm Daniel Cross. Sorry I'm late. Bridge traffic. She didn't stand, didn't extend her hand, just gestured to the chair across from her with the kind of casual dismissal usually reserved for waitstaff. The bridge. She let the words hang there, laden with implication. You don't live in the city. Oakland, Lake Merritt area. He said it without shame, which somehow made it worse. Cassandra allowed herself a small, cold smile. How economical. Something flickered in his expression, not anger exactly, but a kind of careful neutrality that people developed when they were used to absorbing insults. He reached for the water glass in front of him, and she noticed his hands. They were large, scarred across the knuckles with calluses that spoke of manual labor. The nails were clean, but short, practical, working man's hands. She'd seen enough. I'm going to be direct, Daniel, because I respect efficiency, and I assume you do too, given your circumstances. She leaned back slightly, creating physical distance to match her emotional detachment. Isabel means well, but she has a romanticized notion of compatibility that doesn't account for practical realities. You and I exist in fundamentally different worlds. We're sitting in the same cafe, he said quietly. Are we? She gestured around them at the marble tables and the clientele in their designer everything. This is my world. Literally, I have standing reservations here. I'm guessing you looked at the menu outside and recalculated your budget for the month. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I can afford a cup of coffee. Can you? She let her gaze drift pointedly to his worn boots, his faded shirt. Because I'm looking at someone who probably took Bart here, who works with his hands construction or maintenance, and who thought showing up in work clothes was appropriate for a first date at a place where the average entree costs $60. I work in building maintenance, he said evenly. At Oakland Medical Center, I fix things when they break. Plumbing, electrical, HVAC, whatever's needed. Cassandra actually laughed, a sharp sound that drew glances from nearby tables. A janitor. Isabel set me up with a janitor. Maintenance engineer, he corrected, but there was no heat in it. Just that same careful neutrality, like he was stating facts for a report. Of course, how foolish of me to use the wrong title. She signaled their server, a young man who materialized instantly at her table. Espresso, please, single origin medium roast. Then, as an afterthought, she glanced at Daniel. And for you, regular coffee, I assume. Just water's fine, Daniel said to the server, who nodded and retreated. Cassandra shook her head slowly, as if witnessing something both predictable and disappointing. You can't even order coffee. Let me guess. You saw the prices and did the math. What is it, $12 for a cappuccino that's probably close to an hour of your wages? Something like that. His voice remained level, but his hands had moved from the table to his lap. She noticed, removing themselves from her line of fire. So, why are you here? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Surely, you know this is absurd. Look at you. Look at me. What exactly did you think was going to happen? That I'd be charmed by your blue-collar authenticity, that I'd find your poverty noble somehow? For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not anger. She'd have respected anger, but something sadder. Resignation, maybe. Isabel said you were smart and successful, he said quietly. She said you worked hard for everything you have. She thought we might understand each other. Understand each other. Cassandra tasted the words like they were spoiled. I run a $12 billion investment firm. I have 420 employees across 8 offices worldwide. I negotiate with senators and CEOs and people who move markets with their phone calls. You fix toilets. Somebody has to. The simple truth of it infuriated her. Yes, somebody does. Somebody whose aspirations topped out at a steady paycheck and benefits. Don't mistake necessity for virtue, Daniel. You do what you do because you lack the intelligence, ambition, or education to do anything else. The server returned with her espresso, the cup and saucer positioned perfectly on the marble table. Cassandra didn't acknowledge him, didn't break eye contact with Daniel, who was watching her with those steady gray eyes that revealed nothing. When they were alone again, he spoke. You don't know anything about me. I know everything I need to know. She lifted the espresso cup, inhaled the aroma. Notes of chocolate and cherry, exactly as she preferred. I know you're a single father. Isabel mentioned that, as if it was some kind of selling point rather than evidence of poor life choices. I know you work a job that requires no degree, no specialized skills, nothing that couldn't be learned in a few weeks of on-the-job training. I know you live in Oakland, probably in a rent-controlled apartment that you're terrified of losing. Paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from catastrophe. She sipped the espresso, let the bitterness coat her tongue. And I know that you came here today despite knowing you were completely out of your depth. Probably because Isabel guilt-tripped you, or because you were curious about what someone like me even looks like in person. Well, here I am, look your fill. This is what success looks like when you actually work for it, instead of settling for mediocrity. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. Then he said, Are you finished? The question surprised her. There was no anger in it, no wounded pride. Just a simple inquiry, as if he was waiting for a meeting to conclude. It should have satisfied her, this evidence of his defeat. But instead, it irritated her further. Does the truth hurt? She pressed. Is this the part where you get defensive? Where you tell me that money isn't everything, and there's dignity in hard work, and other platitudes that poor people tell themselves to feel better about their situations? No. He shifted slightly in his chair, and she noticed he was sitting in a way that gave him a clear view of both the cafe entrance and the emergency exit near the kitchen. Odd positioning for someone who should be focused entirely on her. This is the part where I wonder what happened to you. Cassandra felt her spine straighten, her fingers tighten on the espresso cup. Excuse me, Isabel talked about you a lot before she set this up. Daniel said, his voice still that same measured calm. She told me you grew up in poverty, that your dad left when you were 6, that your mom worked 3 jobs to keep you fed, that you got into Berkeley on a full scholarship and graduated top of your class, despite having to work nights and weekends to pay for books and food. He paused. She said you built your company from nothing, that you understood struggle. Each word landed like a small explosion in Cassandra's chest, detonating memories she'd buried under layers of silk and success. What's your point? My point is that somewhere between there and here you forgot what it felt like. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to close some of the distance between them. You forgot what it's like to count change for BART fare, to choose between eating and paying the electric bill, to work 3 jobs and still come up short, and instead of remembering with compassion, you turned it into a weapon. You made it to the top, and now you use that achievement to look down on everyone who's still climbing. Cassandra's hand trembled slightly and she set down the espresso cup before he could see. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Something in his voice had changed. Still quiet, but with an edge now. I see someone who's worked so hard to distance herself from where she came from that she can't even recognize her own reflection anymore. Someone so terrified of being vulnerable that she attacks first, hits the hardest, makes sure everyone knows she's untouchable. I'm not terrified of anything. but her voice had lost some of its steel. "Everyone's terrified of something." Daniel glanced toward the entrance again, that same odd, scanning motion, then back to her. "The difference is whether you let that fear make you cruel." She wanted to eviscerate him with words, to find the weakest point in his armor and drive her criticism through it like a blade. But before she could formulate her attack, she noticed something that stopped her cold. His attention wasn't fully on her. Even as they spoke, even as he held her gaze and responded to her barbs, part of his awareness was elsewhere, scanning, assessing. His body language had shifted in the last few minutes, still relaxed to casual observation, but there was a coiled quality to it now, like a spring, compressed and waiting. "Are you even listening to me?" she demanded. "I'm listening." But his eyes had moved past her shoulder, tracking something in the cafe behind her. Keep talking. The presumption of it. The sheer audacity of this maintenance worker telling her what to do should have unleashed her full fury. Instead, something in his tone made her pause. It wasn't dismissive, it was tactical. "What are you, 3 men?" he said, softly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Came in 4 minutes ago. 1 by the front entrance, 1 near the kitchen, 1 by the restroom hallway. They're positioned to control the exits." Cassandra felt ice slide down her spine. "What are you talking about? Don't turn around." His hand moved across the table, not to touch her, but to gesture. Small, contained, a signal to stay still. "The 1 by the entrance has a bulge under his jacket. Left side, probably a gun. The other 2 are carrying bags that are too rigid to be gym equipment." This was insane. This was Daniel trying to distract her from his humiliation, creating some kind of elaborate scenario to shift the power dynamic. "You're being ridiculous. This is San Francisco. There are always Cassandra." He said her name with such quiet authority that she stopped mid-sentence. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. In about 30 seconds, something bad is going to happen in this cafe. When it does, I need you to stay calm and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" She stared at him, searching for the joke, the game, the manipulation. But his face was absolutely serious, his body language radiating a kind of controlled tension she'd never seen before. This wasn't the defeated janitor she'd been verbally dismantling. This was someone else entirely. "You're scaring me," she said, and hated how true it was. "Good." His eyes moved past her again, tracking, calculating. "Fear keeps you alert. Now, when I move, I need you to drop to the floor and get behind the counter. Don't stop. Don't look back. Don't try to help. Just get behind cover and stay down until..." The sound of shattering glass cut through the ambient cafe noise like a gunshot. Cassandra's heart seized in her chest as she whipped around, her training and instincts, or lack thereof, making her do exactly what Daniel had told her not to do. She looked. The man by the entrance had drawn a gun, sleek black, terrifyingly real, and fired a round into the ceiling. Plaster dust rained down on the screaming patrons like snow in hell. The 2 other men Daniel had identified pulled weapons from their bags. Military-style rifles that looked like they belonged in war zones, not San Francisco cafes. "Everybody down." The man by the entrance shouted, his accent thick, Eastern European, maybe Russian. "Hands where we can see, nobody moves, nobody dies." The cafe erupted into chaos, screaming, crying, the crash of overturned chairs and dropped dishes. A woman near the window tried to run and was grabbed by the man near the kitchen, thrown roughly to the ground. A businessman in a Brooks Brothers suit fumbled for his phone and had it kicked from his hand, the screen shattering against the marble floor. Cassandra couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her entire worldview, the one built on control and power, and the certainty that money insulated her from the world's ugliness, shattered as completely as that phone screen. This wasn't supposed to happen, not here, not to her, Cassandra. Daniel's voice cut through her paralysis like a lifeline. Look at me. She tore her eyes from the gunman and found his face, calm, steady, absolutely unfazed by the weapons and the screaming and the violence crackling through the air like electricity. You're going to be okay, he said, and incredibly, impossibly, she believed him. But I need you to move. Now. He rose from his chair in one fluid motion, positioning his body between her and the nearest gunman. His hand, that scarred, calloused hand she'd mocked, extended toward her, palm up, offering. Cassandra took it. The moment her fingers touched his, the world shifted. He pulled her down and forward in one smooth motion, using the table as cover as they moved towards the counter. Around them, other patrons were dropping to the floor, some sobbing, some frozen in shock. The air smelled like fear and expensive perfume and the acrid bite of gunpowder. Behind the counter, Daniel urged his body, still shielding hers. Get behind it and stay low. What about you? The question came out strangled, barely words. I'll be fine. He met her eyes one more time, and she saw something in them that terrified her more than the guns. Certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty of someone who'd done this before. Trust me. Then he was gone, moving away from her and toward the center of the cafe with a purposeful stride that defied every survival instinct, screaming at him to hide. Cassandra scrambled behind the counter, her Hermes bag skidding on the polished floor, her perfect suit jacket torn at the shoulder. She crouched beside a young barista, college-aged, crying silently, mascara streaming down her face, and watched through a gap in the counter as Daniel walked directly into the line of fire. You, one of the gunmen, the leader, she guessed the one who'd shot the ceiling, pointed his weapon at Daniel. On the ground. Now. Daniel stopped walking but didn't get down. He stood there, hands visible, but not raised, his posture relaxed in a way that seemed almost insulting, given the circumstances. You don't want to do this. The gunman actually laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. I don't want to. You see my gun. You see my friends. We do exactly what we want. I see 3 men with weapons and tactical training making a lot of noise in a cafe full of witnesses in the middle of San Francisco. Daniel said calmly. What I don't see is an exit strategy that ends with you getting what you want and walking away alive. The cafe had gone eerily quiet. The screaming reduced to muffled sobs and frightened breathing. Every eye was on Daniel and the gunman, watching the impossible unfold. A maintenance worker in worn jeans standing up to armed robbers like he was discussing plumbing repairs. The gunman's expression darkened. You think you're hero. You think you save everyone. I think you're desperate, Daniel said, and his voice held something Cassandra had never heard from him before. Command. And I think desperate people make bad choices, but you can still walk away from this. Nobody's hurt yet. The security response time for this address is 4 minutes. You've been here for 2. That gives you 2 minutes to leave before SFPD shows up with tactical units and turns this into a situation you can't walk away from. How you know security response time? The gunman's eyes narrowed, his weapon steadying on Daniel's chest. Because I know things. Daniel's gaze shifted slightly, taking in all 3 gunmen, calculating distances and positions with the same precision he'd used earlier when Cassandra thought he was being paranoid. Same way I know you're not professional criminals. Professional crews don't hit cafes in broad daylight. Don't corner themselves in buildings with one entrance. Don't bring more firepower than they need. You're either amateurs who watch too many movies, or you're here for something specific that has nothing to do with the cash register. The gunman's finger twitched on the trigger, and Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. This was insane. Daniel was going to get himself killed. And for what? To prove something. To be the hero. To impress her after she'd spent half an hour destroying him. "You talk too much," the gunman said. "I'm trying to save your life," Daniel replied, taking a small step forward. His hands still visible, still not raised in surrender. "Because in about 90 seconds, when those sirens start, and they will, you're going to have to make a choice. Hostages or escape. You can't have both. And if you choose hostages, if you make this a standoff, you're not walking out of here. You're getting carried out in bags. You think I'm afraid to shoot you. I think you came here for a reason that had nothing to do with killing civilians in a cafe." Another step forward. Daniel was close enough now that Cassandra could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his weight was distributed on the balls of his feet. Ready to move, to act, to do something her mind couldn't even comprehend. "I think you're scared and you're in over your head and you're trying to figure out how this went wrong so fast." The second gunman, the one near the kitchen, spoke rapidly in Russian to the leader. Cassandra didn't speak the language, but she could hear the panic in his voice. The argument happening in real time. The leader's face twisted with anger and something else. Fear, she realized. Daniel was right. These men were terrified. "We came for her," the leader suddenly said, swinging his weapon away from Daniel and pointing it directly at Cassandra's hiding place behind the counter. "The rich bitch. We came for Cassandra Sterling." The world tilted sideways. Cassandra's vision narrowed to a tunnel, everything peripheral falling away, except that gun barrel pointing at her. The black hole that could end her life. This was about her. These men had come here specifically to kidnap her, kill her. Some business deal gone wrong. Some investment that destroyed the wrong lives. Some consequence she'd never considered, because consequences were for other people. "No," Daniel said, and his voice had changed completely. No more negotiation, no more calm reasoning. This was command absolute and unquestionable. "You want her, you go through me." He moved. Cassandra would remember that moment for the rest of her life. The moment Daniel Cross, single father and maintenance engineer from Oakland, transformed into someone else entirely. He moved with a speed and precision that defied his earlier calm, closing the distance to the leader before the man could shift his aim. His hand came up in a strike that looked almost lazy in its economy, connecting with the gunman's wrist and sending the weapon clattering across the floor. The leader tried to fight back, throwing a punch that would have connected with anyone else. But Daniel wasn't there anymore. He'd shifted his weight, redirected the momentum, and suddenly the gunman was on the ground, gasping, Daniel's knee on his spine. His arm twisted at an angle that made Cassandra's stomach turn. "Drop your weapons," Daniel said to the other two gunmen, his voice eerily calm, even as he held their leader immobilized. "Drop them now, and you can still walk away from this." The second gunman raised his rifle and time seemed to slow. Cassandra saw it happening, saw the decision forming, the trajectory of violence that would end with Daniel dead on the cafe floor. And something inside her broke. Not her fear, not her control, but the fundamental belief that she was separate from this, protected by her money and status from the raw chaos of the world. She rose from behind the counter, her voice finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "No. Stop." The second gunman's attention shifted to her for just a fraction of a second, his aim wavering, and Daniel moved again. This time, he released the leader, rolling forward in a motion so fluid it looked rehearsed, coming up inside the second gunman's reach before the man could fire. Another disarm, this one faster, more brutal. The rifle clattered away. The gunman went down hard, his head connecting with the table edge with a sickening crack. The third gunman, the one who'd been stationed by the restroom, made his choice. He ran, straight through the emergency exit near the kitchen, abandoning his companions, his weapon, everything. The door slammed behind him, and then there was only silence. Silence except for ragged breathing and distant sirens growing closer. Daniel stood in the center of the room, two incapacitated gunmen at his feet, his gray Henley torn and bloodied at the shoulder, where one of them must have connected with a strike Cassandra hadn't even seen. He wasn't even breathing hard. He turned to look at her, and for the first time since the violence started, Cassandra saw genuine emotion in his expression. Concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head mute. Everything she'd said earlier, every cruel word, every dismissal, every assumption echoing in her head like accusations. The leader groaned on the floor, trying to rise, and Daniel put a boot on his shoulder. Gentle pressure just enough to keep him down. "Stay. You're dead." The man spat blood on his lips from where his face had hit the marble. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Daniel said quietly. "Same way you're about to know exactly who you tried to kidnap and exactly what kind of person stepped between you and her." The sirens were deafening now, multiple units converging on the cafe. Through the windows, Cassandra could see SFPD vehicles blocking off the street officers emerging with weapons drawn, moving with the kind of precision that suggested tactical training. Daniel raised his hands slowly, making himself non-threatening, as police burst through the entrance shouting commands. "2 suspects down. Non-lethal force," he called out clearly. "Third suspect fled through rear exit approximately 90 seconds ago, heading east. Civilians are frightened but mostly unharmed. I'm the one who engaged the suspects. I'm going to kneel now and put my hands behind my head." He did exactly that, smooth and controlled, like he'd done it 100 times before. The police swarmed in, securing the gunman, checking civilians, establishing a perimeter. A female officer approached Cassandra asking questions she couldn't process, checking her for injuries her body was too shocked to register. The whole time her eyes stayed locked on Daniel, kneeling on the floor with his hands behind his head, calmly answering an officer's questions. "Who are you?" one of the cops asked him. "Daniel Cross. I work maintenance at Oakland Medical Center." "You military—" A pause so brief Cassandra almost missed it. "Used to be." "What unit?" Another pause. "That's classified." The cop studied him for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. He helped Daniel to his feet, treating him less like a suspect and more like a colleague. "You did good work here. Probably saved lives." Daniel's eyes found Cassandra's across the chaos of the cafe. Just did what needed doing. The paramedic's flashlight beam cut across Cassandra's eyes for the 3rd time, and she forced herself not to flinch. Her body felt disconnected from her mind, operating on some autopilot that allowed her to answer questions while her thoughts spiraled in directions she couldn't control. No, she wasn't hurt. Yes, she could follow the light with her eyes. No, she didn't need to go to the hospital. "Ma'am, you're in shock," the paramedic said gently. She was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes that had probably seen too much trauma for her age. "It's completely normal. Your body's processing what just happened. I'd really recommend—" "I'm fine." Cassandra's voice came out sharper than she intended, the old armor snapping back into place, even as her hands trembled against her thighs. "I need to speak with the police. I need to understand why those men miss Sterling." A detective approached his shield, clipped to his belt, his expression professionally neutral. He was older, maybe 52, with gray threading through his dark hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of seeing humanity at its worst. "I'm Detective Marcus Rodriguez. I need to ask you some questions about what happened here today." Cassandra nodded, grateful for something concrete to focus on. Questions she could answer. Facts she could control. "Of course, whatever you need." Detective Rodriguez glanced at the paramedic, who reluctantly stepped back to give them space. He pulled over a chair, one of the cafe's expensive velvet seats now askew from the chaos, and sat down across from Cassandra. His notepad was already open. "First, are you physically injured in any way?" "No." Can you tell me what you were doing at Café Lumière this afternoon? I was meeting someone. A blind date. The words felt absurd now. Ridiculous. A blind date that had turned into an attempted kidnapping. Daniel Cross. We were supposed to have coffee. And you'd never met Mr. Cross before today? No, a friend set it up. Isabel Chen. Any relation? A flicker of something crossed the detective's face. To who? My sister, actually. Small world. He made a note. Did Mr. Cross say or do anything unusual before the suspects entered the cafe? Cassandra's mind flashed back to those moments before the glass shattered. To Daniel's sudden alertness, the way he'd tracked the gunmen's movements before they'd even revealed themselves. He noticed them, she said quietly. Before they pulled weapons, before anything happened, he saw them positioning themselves and knew something was wrong. How did he know? I don't know. She realized she was gripping the edge of the counter hard enough to hurt and forced her fingers to relax. He said they were controlling the exits. He told me to stay calm, that something bad was about to happen. I thought he was being paranoid or trying to distract me from... She stopped abruptly, unwilling to voice what she'd been doing before the world exploded. From what Ms. Sterling... Cassandra met his eyes, and something about his steady professional gaze made her tell the truth. From the fact that I was being cruel to him. I spent the first half hour of our date telling him he was beneath me, that he was poor and uneducated and completely unsuitable. I was trying to end the date as quickly as possible when he noticed the gunmen. Detective Rodriguez's expression didn't change, but she saw understanding flicker there. And after the suspects revealed themselves, he protected me. The words came out quieter than she intended. He put himself between me and their guns. He disarmed two of them with his bare hands. He told them to leave before police arrived, tried to give them an out, even though they'd come here to... Her voice caught. They came here for me. The leader said they came for me specifically. That's what we're trying to determine. Detective Rodriguez flipped a page in his notebook. Do you have any enemies, Ms. Sterling? Anyone who might want to harm you or use you for ransom? Cassandra almost laughed, but it came out as something broken. I run a $12 billion investment firm. I've destroyed companies, restructured others, put people out of work in the name of efficiency and profit margins. I have hundreds of enemies, thousands maybe. People who lost their jobs, their investments, their futures because of decisions I made. But to actually come after me physically to try to kidnap me, she shook her head. That requires a different kind of hatred, or desperation. We'll need a list of your recent business dealings, Detective Rodriguez said, particularly any that involved foreign entities or individuals who might have connections to Eastern European organized crime. The words sent ice through her veins. Organized crime. The suspects are being questioned now, but preliminary identification suggests they have ties to Bratva, Russian criminal organization operating out of Brighton Beach with connections here in the Bay Area. We're working to determine if this was a kidnapping for ransom retaliation for a business dispute or something else entirely. He paused, studying her face. You're a high-profile target, Ms. Sterling. Wealthy, powerful, recognizable. That makes you vulnerable in ways you may not have considered. Cassandra thought about her penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, about the car service that picked her up every morning, about the restaurants and events she attended, where her presence was noted in business columns. She'd built her life to be visible, to be known, to prove to everyone, including herself, that she'd made it. The idea that visibility could be weaponized against her had never occurred to her. What happens now? She asked. We investigate. We question the suspects. We trace their connections and try to determine if there are additional threats. Detective Rodriguez closed his notebook. In the meantime, I'd recommend increased security. private protection, changes to your routine, heightened awareness of your surroundings. I can't just hide in my apartment. I'm not suggesting you hide, I'm suggesting you be smart. He stood, his knees creaking slightly. You got lucky today, Ms. Sterling. You happened to be on a date with someone who had the training and instinct to recognize a threat and neutralize it. Most people aren't that fortunate. He walked away, leaving Cassandra alone with that truth settling over her like a weight. Lucky. She'd been lucky because the man she'd spent 30 minutes verbally eviscerating had saved her life. Across the cafe, past the police officers and crime scene technicians and remaining civilians giving statements, she could see Daniel. He was sitting on one of the velvet benches near the entrance and talking with a different detective. His posture was relaxed, but his attention was fully present. There was blood on his shoulder where his shirt was torn, but he'd refused the paramedics' attention, insisting other people needed it more. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met across the chaos and distance, and Cassandra felt something crack in her chest. Not her armor that had shattered the moment the guns came out, but something deeper, the foundation she'd built her entire adult life upon. The certainty that she was better than other people because she'd climbed higher, earned more, controlled more. Daniel Cross had nothing she valued, no wealth, no status, no power in the world she inhabited. But when bullets were flying and death was a trigger pull away, his calloused hands and blue-collar background had been the only thing standing between her and violence. She looked away, first unable to hold his gaze, and found herself studying her own hands. They'd stopped trembling, she realized. The shock was fading, leaving behind something raw and harder to process: shame. Ms. Sterling. A uniformed officer approached, young and nervous. We're going to need to clear the cafe for the crime scene investigators. Is there somewhere we can take you home? Or, I'm not going anywhere until I can speak with Daniel Cross. The officer blinked clearly, not expecting that response. The civilian who engaged the suspects. The man who saved my life, Cassandra corrected and heard the edge in her voice. I'm not leaving until I've thanked him. But as she said it, she realized thanks wasn't enough. Couldn't be enough. How did you thank someone for absorbing violence meant for you? For stepping between you and death when you'd given them every reason to walk away? The officer nodded uncertainly. I'll let Detective Rodriguez know. He retreated, and Cassandra was left alone again with her thoughts, and the growing realization that nothing about her life would be the same after today. The cafe around her looked different now. The beautiful fixtures seemed fragile. The expensive art on the walls irrelevant. The whole carefully curated atmosphere exposed as the illusion it was. Beauty and wealth couldn't stop bullets. Power couldn't disarm attackers. Success was meaningless when you were on your knees behind a counter praying not to die. Ms. Sterling. Another voice, softer this time. Cassandra looked up to find a woman in her 40s, professionally dressed in a dark pantsuit, her expression carefully sympathetic. I'm Dr. Sarah Winters with the department's crisis response team. I wanted to check in with you, see how you're processing what happened. I'm fine, the automatic response, the default shield. Dr. Winters sat down without being invited, her movements gentle and non-threatening. You were involved in a violent incident. You were targeted specifically by armed assailants. Your life was threatened. There's no universe in which you're fine right now, Ms. Sterling, and pretending otherwise doesn't make you stronger. It just makes the crash harder when it comes. Cassandra wanted to argue to reassert control through denial, but something in the woman's tone stopped her. Not pity. She would have rejected pity, but understanding. What crash? The one that happens when your brain stops running on adrenaline and fear and starts actually processing what you survived. Dr. Winters leaned forward slightly. You might have nightmares, panic attacks, difficulty sleeping or concentrating. You might find yourself jumping at loud noises or feeling unsafe in places you used to feel comfortable. These are normal responses to trauma, not signs of weakness. I don't have time for trauma, Cassandra said flatly. I have a company to run deals to close hundreds of people depending on my decisions. I can't afford to fall apart. Then you can't afford not to deal with this. Dr. Winters countered, her voice firm but kind. Because trauma doesn't wait for convenient moments. It doesn't care about your schedule or your responsibilities. If you ignore it, if you try to power through it like it's just another obstacle to overcome, it will find ways to express itself that you can't control. Trust me, I've seen it happen to people far more prepared than you. The words stung because they were true. Cassandra had built her empire on control, on the ability to manage variables and eliminate weaknesses. But this feeling of fundamental vulnerability, of having stared into the void and survived only through another person's intervention, wasn't something she could manage or eliminate. What do I do? The question came out smaller than she intended. You acknowledge what happened. You talk about it. You let yourself feel the fear and anger and confusion instead of burying it under work and routine. Dr. Winters pulled a card from her pocket, handed it to Cassandra. And you call me or someone like me because processing trauma alone is like trying to set a broken bone without help. Possible maybe, but the healing will be crooked and painful. Cassandra took the card, her fingers closing around it automatically. I'll think about it. Do more than think. Dr. Winters stood, her expression still kind but firm. Because the people who survive trauma best aren't the ones who pretend it didn't happen. They're the ones who face it and decide to grow around it rather than be consumed by it. She walked away, leaving Cassandra holding a business card she wasn't sure she'd ever use, and contemplating the uncomfortable reality that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have all the answers. Cassandra. She looked up sharply to find Daniel standing a few feet away, Detective Rodriguez beside him. Daniel's shirt was still bloodied, his jeans dusty from the floor, but his expression was gentle, concerned, the same expression he'd worn when he'd asked if she was hurt, when he'd put his body between her and guns, when he'd transformed from the target of her cruelty into her protector. They said you wanted to speak with me, he continued quietly. Cassandra stood, her legs steadier now, but her heart racing. What did you say to someone who'd done what he'd done? How did you apologize for cruelty when they'd responded to it with heroism? The words she'd used earlier, janitor beneath her, poor, echoed in her head like accusations. I wanted to thank you. She managed the words, feeling inadequate even as she said them. For what you did, for saving my life. Daniel shook his head slightly. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. The words came out fierce, urgent. You could have run when those men came in, when they pulled weapons. You could have hid and protected yourself, let me deal with the consequences of whatever business dealings brought them here. Instead, you... Her voice broke. You stepped between me and bullets. After everything I said to you, after I spent 30 minutes telling you that you were worthless and beneath me and not good enough. Why did you do that? The cafe had gone quiet around them, other people moving away to give them privacy, but Cassandra was barely aware of the space. All her attention was focused on Daniel's face, searching for answers she wasn't sure she deserved. Because it was the right thing to do, Daniel said simply. And because no matter what you said, no matter how cruel you were, you didn't deserve to die for it. I was horrible to you. The admission came out raw, stripped of her usual polish. Everything I said about your job, your life, your circumstances, I was trying to hurt you, to make you feel small because it made me feel bigger. I know. No anger in his voice, just acknowledgement. But hurt people, Cassandra. I learned that a long time ago. You were scared, not of me, but of what I represented. Someone who reminded you of where you came from, who you used to be before you built all these walls to protect yourself. The accuracy of it stole her breath. How did you... Isabel told me about your childhood, Daniel said quietly. About your mom, your dad leaving, the poverty you fought your way out of. She thought it would help me understand you. It did. I saw someone who'd been hurt so badly that she decided never to be vulnerable again, never to be the weak one, never to be looked down on. So you climbed as high as you could and made sure everyone below you knew their place. Tears burned in Cassandra's eyes, hot and unwelcome. She hadn't cried in years. Not at board meetings when men tried to intimidate her. Not when deals fell through. Not even at her mother's funeral 3 years ago. But here in a cafe that smelled like gunpowder and fear in front of a man she'd tried to destroy with words the tears came anyway. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for what I said. You didn't deserve any of it." No, I didn't. Daniel's honesty was somehow kinder than false absolution would have been. But I understand why you said it, and I forgive you anyway. The forgiveness was almost worse than anger would have been. It implied a generosity of spirit that Cassandra wasn't sure she possessed a capacity for grace that her entire worldview had taught her to see as weakness. "The detective told me they came here for me," she said, needing to fill the silence with something other than her shame. "That this was targeted, that I might still be in danger." Daniel nodded slowly. "I heard. Are they providing protection?" "They recommended private security, changes to my routine." Cassandra laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I don't even know what that means. I've spent my entire adult life being visible, being known. How do I just hide? You don't hide, you adapt." Daniel glanced around the cafe, his gaze taking in the exits and sightlines with that same tactical awareness she'd noticed earlier. You vary your patterns, change your routes, stay alert to your surroundings. You stop being predictable. You sound like you've done this before. A shadow crossed his expression there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. Different context, but yeah, I've had to think about security before. Detective Rodriguez, who'd been standing quietly to the side, stepped forward. "Mr. Cross, we're going to need you to come down to the precinct for a more detailed statement. The district attorney's office will want to talk to you about the use of force, though. Given the circumstances, I don't anticipate any charges." "Charges?" Cassandra's voice came out sharper than she intended. "He saved lives. He stopped a kidnapping. Why would there be any question of charges? Civilian use of force is always reviewed." "Ms. Sterling," Detective Rodriguez said patiently. "Especially when it results in injuries to the suspects. It's standard procedure. Mr. Cross understands that, don't you?" "Yeah, I understand." Daniel turned to Cassandra, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. "Are you going to be okay getting home? I mean, do you have someone who can stay with you tonight?" The question was so simple, so practical, and it highlighted the fundamental isolation of her life. Did she have someone? Friends who were really friends? Not business contacts, family beyond the mother she'd buried. Anyone who would drop everything to sit with her in the aftermath of trauma. "I'll be fine," she said, and heard how empty it sounded. "I always am." Daniel studied her face for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable sense that he could see straight through the lie. "If you need anything, if you feel unsafe, or just want someone to talk to, Isabel has my number. Don't hesitate to call." He was offering help, after everything he was offering to help her. "I don't deserve your kindness," Cassandra said quietly. "Maybe not." Daniel agreed, and there was a hint of something in his voice. Humor, maybe, or just honest assessment. "But I'm offering it anyway. What you do with it is up to you." Detective Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Mr. Cross, we really need to go." Daniel nodded, but before he could leave, Cassandra found herself reaching out her hand, catching his arm. He stopped looking down at where her perfectly manicured fingers rested on his bloodied sleeve. "Your daughter," Cassandra said, the words coming out before she'd fully formed the thought. "You mentioned you're a single father. Is someone watching her? Does she know you're okay?" Something shifted in Daniel's expression, softening, warming in a way she hadn't seen before. "My neighbor's got her, Mrs. Kowalski. She's probably making Emma dinner right now, helping with homework. Emma knows I had plans, but she doesn't know about this. I'll tell her something age-appropriate later." "How old is she?" "8. Pride colored his voice, unmistakable and genuine. "She's in 3rd grade. Loves reading, hates math. Wants to be a marine biologist when she grows up." Cassandra tried to imagine it. Daniel Cross going home to a daughter helping with homework, making dinner in a small apartment in Oakland. A life built around something other than profit margins and power dynamics. A life where success was measured in bedtime stories and parent-teacher conferences rather than board meetings and stock prices. "She's lucky to have you," Cassandra said, and meant it. "I'm lucky to have her," Daniel replied, gently extracting his arm from her grip. The gesture wasn't unkind. "She's the reason I do everything I do, the reason I work, the reason I stayed in the Bay Area, the reason I—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "She's my whole world." "Mr. Cross." Detective Rodriguez's patience was clearly wearing thin. "I'm coming." Daniel looked at Cassandra one more time. "Take care of yourself, Cassandra. And if you meant what you said about being sorry, prove it by being kinder to the next person who doesn't meet your standards. Not because you owe me, but because cruelty doesn't protect you from anything. It just makes you lonelier." Then he was gone, walking away with Detective Rodriguez, leaving Cassandra standing in the ruins of the cafe and the wreckage of her certainty about who she was and what mattered. The next hour passed in a blur of statements and paperwork and official procedures. Cassandra answered questions, provided contact information, accepted cards from various law enforcement officials who promised to keep her updated on the investigation. The cafe's owner appeared at some point apologetic and shaken, offering compensation for her trauma, as if money could erase the memory of guns and violence. She declined, absently, her mind elsewhere. When they finally released her, when she was allowed to leave the crime scene that had been her blind date, Cassandra stood on the sidewalk outside Café Lumière and realized she had no idea what to do next. Her driver had been sent home hours ago when she'd expected to catch an Uber after quickly ending the date. The street was busy with evening traffic, people hurrying past with their phones and their coffees and their lives, completely unaware that just hours ago someone had almost died behind those beautiful cafe windows. Cassandra pulled out her phone and stared at it, her thumb hovering over various contacts. Her assistant, her head of security, the car service. All professional relationships, all transactional. No one she could call and say, "Something terrible happened, and I'm scared and I don't want to be alone." She scrolled further, found Isabel's name, and before she could second-guess herself, hit dial. "Cassandra," Isabel's voice came through, worried and breathless. "Oh my God, I heard about what happened. Are you okay? Are you hurt? The news is saying there was an attempted kidnapping at Lumière, and I knew you were meeting Daniel there, and I've been calling and texting, but you didn't answer, and I'm okay." Cassandra's voice cracked on the words. "Physically, I'm okay. Isabel, I need to ask you something." "Anything. What do you need? Why did you set us up?" The question came out plaintive, almost childlike. "You had to know we were completely incompatible. You had to know I'd be awful to him. So why did you do it?" Isabel was quiet for a moment, and Cassandra could hear street noise in the background. Isabel was probably walking home from her office in the Mission, navigating the evening crowds. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "Because I love you, Cassandra. You're brilliant and driven and loyal to the people you care about. But you're also so lonely it breaks my heart. You've built this perfect controlled life where no one can hurt you. And in the process, you've made it impossible for anyone to love you either." The words landed like physical blows, precise and devastating. "I thought if you met someone real," Isabel continued, "someone who'd lived through struggle and come out kind instead of cruel, someone who prioritized things that actually matter over things that just look impressive, maybe you'd see another way of being. Maybe you'd remember that the girl who fought her way out of poverty and into Berkeley didn't do it to become the kind of person who looks down on others. She did it to have choices, to have freedom, to have a life where she didn't have to be afraid anymore." "I was horrible to him," Cassandra whispered, her vision blurring with tears she could no longer hold back. "I said terrible things, and then he saved your life anyway," Isabel said softly. "That's who Daniel is. He's a good man, Cassandra, one of the best I know. And you know what? I think underneath all your armor and cruelty and fear, you're a good person too. You've just forgotten how to be one." Cassandra closed her eyes, standing on a San Francisco sidewalk while evening descended and her whole sense of self crumbled around her. "I don't know how to fix this. Any of it. I don't know how to be the person I was before I became this." "You start small," Isabel said. "You apologize when you're wrong. You help when you can. You choose kindness over cruelty, even when cruelty feels safer. And you stop measuring people's worth by their bank accounts or job titles or zip codes." "He told me to prove my apology by being kinder to the next person who doesn't meet my standards," Cassandra said quietly. "That sounds like Daniel," Isabel replied. "Listen, come to my place. Don't go home to that empty penthouse. Come have dinner, drink too much wine, and let yourself fall apart with someone who's known you since before you learned to build walls." The offer was tempting, almost overwhelmingly so. But Cassandra shook her head, even though Isabel couldn't see it. "I can't, not tonight. I need to think, to process, to figure out who I am now that everything I believed about strength and safety just got proven wrong." "Okay," Isabel said, but Cassandra could hear the worry. "But promise me you'll call if you need anything. And Cassandra, what happened today, it wasn't your fault. Whatever business dealings brought those men there, you didn't deserve to be targeted. You didn't deserve to be scared. And you definitely didn't deserve to be validated in your belief that the world is dangerous and people are cruel." "Daniel wasn't cruel," Cassandra said quietly. "Even when I gave him every reason to be, he was kind and brave, and he saw right through me like I was transparent. Like all my armor and success was just nothing." "That's because, to someone like Daniel, it is nothing," Isabel replied. "He measures people differently than you do. And maybe that's the lesson here, that the things you've been chasing your whole adult life aren't the things that actually matter when bullets start flying." They said their goodbyes with promises to talk tomorrow, and Cassandra stood alone again on the sidewalk. She pulled up her car service app, requested a pickup, and watched the little car icon on her screen navigate through San Francisco traffic toward her location. While she waited, she found herself pulling up Daniel's social media, an impulse she'd never have indulged before, too far beneath her notice. His profiles were sparse, mostly private, but she could see a few public photos. Daniel with his daughter, both of them grinning at the aquarium. Daniel in running gear at what looked like a charity 5K. Daniel and an older woman, Mrs. Kowalski, maybe at some neighborhood event, both holding plates of food and laughing. A life built around people and connections and moments rather than achievements and acquisitions. A life she'd dismissed as small and meaningless. A life that, looking at it now, seemed infinitely richer than her own. The car arrived sleek and black and anonymous. Cassandra slid into the back seat, gave her address, and watched the city blur past her window. She lived in a penthouse on Union Square. $18 million of carefully curated perfection, with views that made visitors gasp, and enough square footage to house a family of 6 comfortably. She'd bought it as proof. Proof that she'd made it. Proof that she belonged. Proof that the scared little girl from Detroit was dead and buried under layers of success. Tonight, the thought of returning to all that empty space made her chest tight with something that felt like panic. The security guard at her building greeted her by name, his expression professional and distant. The elevator rose smoothly through the floors, each number lighting up in sequence until she reached the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into her foyer, a feature that had seemed sophisticated when she bought the place but now felt isolating. Cassandra stepped into her apartment and stopped, really seeing it for the first time in years. The furniture was beautiful, expensive, and completely impersonal. Danish modern pieces arranged by an interior designer based on photographs in Architectural Digest. The art on the walls had been chosen by a consultant based on investment value rather than aesthetic preference. Something about emerging markets and portfolio diversification. The kitchen was chef quality, all Sub-Zero appliances and Italian marble, and she'd used it maybe 10 times in 3 years. The second bedroom served as a home office. The third as a closet for her designer wardrobe. There was no evidence that anyone actually lived here. No photos. No personal touches. Nothing that suggested warmth or history or love. It was a showpiece, a trophy. Proof of success that felt in this moment like proof of failure. Her phone buzzed. A text from her head of security, David Chen, confirming that he'd received the police report and was implementing enhanced protocols starting tomorrow. Another text from her assistant asking if she needed anything. A third from her company's PR director warning her that the attempted kidnapping had made the news and they should prepare a statement. Nothing from anyone asking how she was. If she was scared, if she needed someone to just sit with her while she processed the fact that she'd almost died today. Cassandra walked to her living room windows, pressing her palm against the glass and looking out over Union Square. 18 stories below, people were walking dogs and jogging and living lives that intersected with other lives in meaningful ways. And here she stood alone at the top, realizing that she'd spent so much time climbing that she'd never stopped to ask if the summit was worth the isolation. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, and for the first time in years, Cassandra let herself see it clearly. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the success story. Just a woman who'd been so terrified of being hurt that she'd hurt everyone else first. A woman whose cruelty had been armor and whose armor had become a prison. Daniel's words echoed in her head. Cruelty doesn't protect you from anything. It just makes you lonelier. He was right. God help her, the maintenance worker from Oakland with his calloused hands and worn clothes had seen her more clearly in 30 minutes than anyone had in decades. And instead of using that insight to manipulate or wound her, he'd used it to save her life anyway. Cassandra pulled out Dr. Winter's card, studying the number printed there. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow, she'd call and start the work of healing whatever was broken inside her. Tomorrow, she'd begin the impossible task of becoming someone different, someone better, someone who chose kindness over cruelty, even when cruelty felt safer. But tonight she'd let herself feel everything. The fear, the shame, the loneliness, the devastating recognition that money and power and control meant nothing when you were kneeling behind a counter praying for someone else to save you. Tonight, she'd let herself be broken, because maybe, just maybe, breaking was the first step toward healing. Cassandra didn't sleep that night. She lay in her king-sized bed with its 1,000 thread-count sheets and watched shadows move across her ceiling, her mind replaying the cafe scene on an endless loop. The sound of shattering glass, the weight of Daniel's hand pulling her down. The cold certainty in the gunman's voice when he said they'd come for her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the barrel of that weapon pointing at her hiding place. Felt the paralyzing terror of knowing she was completely powerless. At 3 a.m, she gave up pretending and moved to her living room, curling up on her designer sofa with a blanket and her laptop. She told herself she was checking overnight market reports from Asia, reviewing quarterly projections, catching up on work. But her fingers betrayed her typing Daniel Cross into the search engine and pulling up what little public information existed about a man who'd saved her life. There wasn't much. No social media presence beyond those locked-down profiles she'd glimpsed earlier. A few mentions in local Oakland newspapers. Daniel Cross finishing a community 5K to raise money for Children's Hospital. Daniel Cross volunteering at a neighborhood cleanup day. Daniel Cross coaching youth soccer. Small acts of civic participation that wouldn't register on anyone's radar but painted a picture of someone embedded in his community, contributing in ways that had nothing to do with wealth or status. She found one news article from 7 years ago, brief and buried in the archives. Local veteran returns home after medical discharge, begins new chapter. No details about his service. No mention of what had caused the discharge. Just a generic statement about transitioning to building maintenance work and focusing on raising his daughter after his wife's death in childbirth. The article was 3 paragraphs long and treated like filler content, but Cassandra read it 5 times trying to piece together a life from fragments. Medical discharge. That meant injury, didn't it? Or psychological trauma. Something that had ended his military career prematurely. But watching him move in that cafe, the precision, the controlled violence, the absolute certainty of someone who'd done this before, she couldn't imagine what would have forced him out. He'd moved like someone still in peak condition, still trained, still dangerous when he needed to be. What happened to you, she wondered, staring at the grainy photo accompanying the article. What did you see? What did you do? What broke you badly enough that they sent you home? And why, after everything, did you choose kindness? Dawn broke slowly over San Francisco, the sky lightening from black to gray to the pale gold of early autumn. Cassandra watched it happen from her windows, still wrapped in her blanket, still searching for answers that Google couldn't provide. At 7, her phone started buzzing with messages. Her assistant confirming the day's schedule. Her head of security requesting a meeting to discuss enhanced protocols. Her PR director with a draft statement about yesterday's incident. The machine of her life grinding back into motion, pulling her back into the role she'd perfected over decades. She showered, dressed in armor, a navy Armani suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and prepared to face the world as Cassandra Sterling, CEO, billionaire woman who had everything under control. But her hands shook slightly as she applied her makeup, and she had to redo her eyeliner twice because the wings wouldn't match. Small cracks in the facade that no one would notice but her. The car service arrived precisely at 8. Her new driver, younger than her regular one, clearly briefed by security, didn't attempt conversation beyond confirming her destination. They took a different route than usual, varied and unpredictable. Part of those enhanced protocols she'd been told were necessary. Cassandra watched familiar streets pass from unfamiliar angles and felt increasingly disconnected from her own life, like she was watching someone else's story unfold. Her office occupied the top 2 floors of a financial district tower, all glass and steel and commanding views. She rode the private elevator up, her assistant meeting her the moment the doors opened with coffee and a tablet full of urgent matters requiring immediate attention. Cassandra took both, automatically falling into the rhythm of her days because it was easier than thinking about yesterday. The board wants to meet this afternoon to discuss security concerns, her assistant said, walking beside her through the halls where employees straightened up at her approach and murmured greetings she barely acknowledged. They're worried about liability. about whether the incident represents a broader threat to company operations, and the media requests have been overwhelming. Everyone wants a statement and interview details about what happened. Tell the board 3 o'clock in the main conference room, Cassandra said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion dragging at her. Tell the media we're referring all inquiries to SFPD and have no further comment at this time. Anything else? Detective Rodriguez called. He said it wasn't urgent, but asked if you could call him back when you have a moment. Her assistant hesitated. And Isabel Chen called 3 times. She said to tell you that you promised to check in and she's not above showing up at your office if you don't call her back. Despite everything, Cassandra felt her mouth twitch toward something almost like a smile. That was Isabel, bulldozing through boundaries in the name of friendship, refusing to accept dismissal or deflection. I'll call her. Her office was exactly as she'd left it yesterday morning before the blind date that had changed everything. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, abstract art that had been featured in a design magazine. The entire east wall was windows overlooking the city, and her west wall was lined with awards and photographs from various industry events. Cassandra shaking hands with politicians and CEOs and other people who moved in her stratosphere. Evidence of success, of belonging, of mattering. It all felt hollow now. She sat behind her desk and stared at her computer screen without seeing it, her mind drifting back to the cafe, to Daniel's calm voice telling her to stay down, to the way he'd moved between her and danger without hesitation. That man, the one who disarmed attackers with his bare hands and negotiated with gunmen like he was discussing plumbing repairs, that man had a daughter he went home to. A life built around something other than proving his worth to a world that had tried to break him. Cassandra pulled out her phone and dialed Isabel before she could second-guess herself. About damn time, Isabel answered, skipping past pleasantries. You didn't call last night. You didn't answer my texts. I was 2 seconds away from filing a missing persons report. I'm sorry, I couldn't. Cassandra stopped, unsure how to explain the paralysis that had gripped her, the inability to reach out even to the one person who genuinely cared. I needed time alone. Alone in that sterile penthouse processing trauma by yourself like you process everything else, with no support, no comfort, no human connection whatsoever. Isabel's voice softened slightly. Cassandra, you almost died yesterday. You don't have to be strong right now. You're allowed to fall apart. I can't afford to fall apart. I have 420 employees depending on me, billions in assets under management, responsibilities that don't pause for trauma. But even as she said it, Cassandra heard the hollowness of the words. Responsibilities to what? To whom? To shareholders and profit margins and a company that would replace her within days if she disappeared tomorrow. How's Daniel? The question came out before she could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than she'd intended. Isabel was quiet for a moment. You really want to know? Yes. He's okay. Physically fine. A few bruises, but nothing serious. Spent 5 hours at the precinct last night giving statements, answering questions about the use of force. His daughter knows something happened. Hard to keep that kind of thing quiet when it's all over the news, but he told her a simplified version that wouldn't give her nightmares. Cassandra closed her eyes, imagining Daniel sitting at a small kitchen table in Oakland explaining to an 8-year-old girl that Daddy had helped some people in trouble, but everyone was safe now. The patience that would require. The careful calibration of honesty and protection. Did he say anything about me? The question was pathetic. Needy. Everything she'd spent her adult life learning not to be. But she needed to know if he hated her now, if saving her life had been pure instinct that he regretted in retrospect. He said he hopes you're okay, Isabel replied carefully. He said trauma affects everyone differently, and he hopes you have people around you to help you process it. He was worried about you, Cassandra. Even after everything you said to him, he was worried about you." The kindness was almost worse than anger would have been. Cassandra pressed her fingers to her eyes, feeling the prick of tears she couldn't afford to shed. Not here, not in her office where anyone could walk in and see weakness she couldn't explain. "I was horrible to him," she said quietly. "Everything you warned me not to do, every cruel instinct I promised myself I'd control, I did it all. I looked at him and saw everything I used to be, everything I've spent years running from, and I tried to destroy him for it." "I know," Isabel said gently. "Daniel told me some of what you said, and you know what he said after he said you were scared, that you were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. He understood, Cassandra. Even while you were attacking him, he understood why you were doing it." "How?" The word came out broken. "How does someone have that much grace, that much capacity for forgiveness? I think, when you've survived real darkness, combat, loss, whatever Daniel went through that got him discharged, the small cruelties of daily life stop having the same weight," Isabel said thoughtfully. "Or maybe he's just a genuinely good person who understands that hurt people, and he chose not to take it personally." Cassandra thought about the scars on Daniel's hands, the careful way he'd positioned himself in the cafe to maintain sightlines, the absolute certainty with which he'd moved when violence erupted. Whatever darkness he'd survived, it had forged him into someone capable of extraordinary things. Someone who'd chosen, despite everything, to be kind. "I don't know how to fix this," Cassandra admitted. "Any of it. I don't know how to apologize adequately for what I said. I don't know how to process what happened in that cafe. I don't know how to go back to my life pretending everything's normal when nothing feels normal anymore." "Then don't," Isabel said simply. "Don't go back to normal. Use this as a catalyst for change. You've been given a second chance, Cassandra. Not everyone gets that. Don't waste it by defaulting back to the same patterns that made you miserable in the first place." "I'm not miserable." But the protest was automatic, hollow. "Really, when's the last time you laughed, actually laughed? Not that corporate networking smile you put on for board meetings and investor calls. When's the last time you did something just because it brought you joy with no strategic purpose or networking opportunity attached? When's the last time you let yourself be vulnerable with another person and trusted them not to use it against you?" Cassandra couldn't answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with truth. "That's what I thought," Isabel said softly. "You're not living, Cassandra. You're surviving. You've been surviving for so long that you've forgotten there's supposed to be more to life than just not drowning. And yesterday, when those men came in with guns, that was life reminding you what's actually at stake." "I called Dr. Winters," Cassandra said abruptly. "The crisis counselor from yesterday. I'm meeting with her this afternoon after my board meeting." She could hear Isabel smile through the phone. "That's good. That's really good. It's a start." "Just a start," Cassandra said. "One therapy session isn't going to undo decades of building walls and learning to see kindness as weakness." "No, it won't," Isabel agreed. "But it's a first step, and first steps matter." She paused. "Can I tell you something that might make you uncomfortable? Haven't we crossed that bridge already? Daniel wants to see you." Cassandra's breath caught. "What? He called me this morning. Asked if I thought you'd be open to meeting with him again. Somewhere public, somewhere safe. No pressure. He said there were things he wanted to say, things he couldn't say at the cafe with police and chaos everywhere." Isabel's voice gentled. "I think he wants to make sure you're really okay, and I think maybe he wants to give you a chance to apologize properly, on your terms, without an audience." "Why would he want that?" Cassandra's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Why would he give me another opportunity to hurt him? Maybe because he sees something in you worth giving a second chance to, Isabel said. Or maybe because that's just who Daniel is, someone who believes in people's capacity for growth and change. She let that sink in. What should I tell him? Cassandra's first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from further humiliation by avoiding him entirely. But that was the old pattern, the defensive crouch she'd been living in for decades. And where had it gotten her alone in a penthouse? Friendless, except for Isabel. Powerful, but paralyzed. Successful, but suffocating. Tell him yes, she said the words feeling like stepping off a cliff. Tell him I'll meet him whenever, wherever he wants. I owe him that much at least. You owe him a lot more than that, Isabel said, but her tone was approving. But it's a start, I'll let him know. They hung up, and Cassandra sat alone in her office, staring out at the San Francisco skyline and trying to reconcile the woman she'd been yesterday morning with the woman she was becoming. The change felt seismic, foundational, like tectonic plates shifting beneath her carefully constructed life. She had no idea who she'd be when the dust settled, but for the first time and longer than she could remember, she wanted to find out. If this story is making you think differently about success, kindness, or second chances, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. What would you do if you were in Cassandra's position? Could you forgive someone who treated you the way she treated Daniel? And don't forget to subscribe because this journey is far from over. Part 7. Drop soon and you won't want to miss what happens when these two meet again.